Hi, I'm Ted Pattison of Critical Path Training. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create strongly typed classes with a utility called SPMetal so that I can do link programming against a SharePoint list. Now, as far as the different providers that Link has available, well, there's the LINQtoSQL provider. That came out with .NET 3.5 and Visual Studio 2008, and compared to the SharePoint provider, which is just making its debut with the release of SharePoint 2010, the LINQtoSQL provider is very mature and has a great set of tools associated with it. And what we're hoping is that the LINQtoSharePoint provider, will grow in much the same way with lots of support from the teams within Microsoft. There's also a LINQtoXML provider and a LINQtoEntities provider, and it should be obvious to any developer working on the .NET platform that Link is the strategic way moving forward that all developers will access data. Now, LINQtoSharePoint, one of the nice things it's going to do is it's going to get rid of our need to deal face-to-face with CAML, or Collaborative Access Markup Language. Now, SharePoint developers have had love-hate relationships with CAML ever since the beginning. Now, CAML hasn't really gone away, but as I program LINQtoSharePoint, what's going to happen is I'm going to write link statements. As I write my link statements, behind the scenes, the LINQtoSharePoint provider is going to translate my link statement into a CAML statement, and it's going to basically deal with the execution of the CAML statement against the SharePoint front end and basically get the data from the content database, bring it back, and then put it into friendly .NET objects, making it easy for me to enumerate through. Now, I'm going to use a tool, and this tool is going to be called SPMetal. I'm going to point it to a particular site, and as I do that, it's going to basically create strongly typed link classes for me. And as I then add the source file to my project that was created by this utility, I'm then going to get back strongly typed collections, which is going to give me compile time type checking as I pull data back from the fields inside a particular list. I'm also going to get help from IntelliSense. Now, there is an assembly that I'm going to have to reference, which is microsoft.sharepoint.link.dll. Now, when I use LINQtoSharePoint, I have to create the entity classes, and I'll do that using the utility SPMetal. Second, I'm going to, inside my application, create an instance of this special class called the data context, and then I'm going to write my link queries. It's going to be a very straightforward process. Now, when I use this utility, SPMetal, I'm going to point it to a list, and I'm going to point it to, a site collection, and it's going to go off and create a bunch of entity classes. And after I create this file, I put them inside of my project, and then I'm going to get strongly typed access by programming against them. Now, here's an example of this data context object. Think of your data context as your connection to a SharePoint site collection. And so if I say data get list customers and point to that customer list, it's going to bring that back to me. And notice now that I can say var q from C in customers, where C.city equals London, select C, and then just do a for each loop right through my SharePoint list with strongly typed access to the columns. Okay, so it's because of this data context and the way it gets created, that makes it really easy because there is going to be a customer's property right off the data context object, which is going to allow me just to say data context.customers to pull back my customers collection. Okay, another really neat thing about Link is that it can understand relationships between two different lists. For instance, if you have a list of customers and a list of orders, and there's a one-to-many relationship between customers and orders. Well, if you write a link statement and you start looking at customers, every customer is going to have a column which holds a reference to a collection of orders. And every single order is going to have a column that points back to a customer. And so one of the nice conveniences of programming against Link is quite often when we used to have to write join statements in SQL Server, we no longer have to do the join because LINQ is sensitive to pick up the associations of the relationship and automatically bring the data back for the one-to-many relationship. Okay, another nice thing about programming with LINQ is the data context object is going to allow me to modify data. So if I bring back a set of list items, well, I can edit those items inside of my code on the front-end web server, and then through the data context, I can call submit changes to save the data back. Okay, so now let's go see a very simple demo. So we'll use the SP Metal utility. We'll create the entity classes, and then we'll add them to our project and start programming. Okay, now we begin our LINQtoSharePoint adventure by using this utility called SP Metal. So I've set up this little batch file. Let's go ahead and open it up. And if we look at this, I'll make this just a teeny bit bigger so you can see what's inside here. We have a utility called SP Metal, which ships inside of the SharePoint root files directory, inside the bin directory, spmetal.exe. So what we're going to do is we're going to call out to SP Metal, and we're going to have a /web argument and point it to a particular site collection. Now, it just turns out that we have a site collection, and this site collection has a couple different lists inside, including this customer list. So let's say, or a contacts list, let's say I wanted to fill up a list box with some particular customers. So what we're going to do is we're going to run this. Now, when I run SP Metal, it's going to create a source code file for me. So I'm going to tell it, please name this SP Northwind. And also, we're going to go ahead and create a namespace, which I'll also call Northwind. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and run the batch file. And now that I run the batch file, it creates this source file. Now that it's created this source file, we're going to take the source file, SP Northwind. We're going to go back to SharePoint in the SharePoint project that I'm building, and I'm going to go ahead and add this inside. Now, one thing to note is that my project already has Microsoft.SharePoint.link. If you don't have this reference, you're going to have to add it to your project. Now, before we look at this, let's go back here, and let's go ahead and open this up. So notice that this source file, generally we don't look inside here, but I'm going to go ahead and collapse to definitions. And what I note is that it's created this one object, which is called the SP Northwind Data Context object, and it has a constructor that takes the URL, which will be the pointer to your site collection, and then it's create a strongly typed entity class for each one of the lists that is found inside there. Okay, now let's go back to this particular form. And I'm going to go ahead and put some code behind one of these buttons right here. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an object of this data context class. Once we create this particular object, which we've called SP Northwind, well, let's go ahead and take a look at this. SP Northwind dot, and notice that there's my customers, there's my contacts. So now, let's go back here and say var query equals from C in SP Northwind dot contacts. Now I could add where clauses, where C dot, possibly we care about last name. Maybe we don't want that to equal a empty string or be blank. And do we want to put a order by statement in place? You know, order by C dot, and if I go back to my list, well, we have Steve, then Bill. So if we did a order by first name, well, that would give us what we want inside there. And then finally, we're going to say select C. Okay, so now that we have our link statement written, let's go ahead and say for each, and I want to look at each particular contact. Now, once you start using link, you really kind of get a lot of motivation to use the var. Well, this is going to be a strongly typed variable. If I'm not really sure what it should be strongly typed to, that will be obvious. So if we basically go through here and say var c in query, now what we're going to be able to do is simply go through here, and we're going to be able to say, first of all, we have a list box there, so why don't we go ahead and make sure that we take our list box and we'll go ahead and clear it out. So all these other queries that we're running inside here are dealing with this particular list box, which is LST SP data. Okay, so back inside of our form, once again down here, we'll go ahead and here is the code that we've written behind here. And so before we go ahead and fill up the list box, we'll say LSD SP data dot items dot clear. And then secondly, we'll move down through here and we'll go ahead and take our list box and we'll say items dot add, and we'll go ahead and we'll add in our contact dot, and we'll go ahead and add in maybe first name at first. Okay, so now that we've got that in place right here, let's go ahead and run this. I go ahead and run this, and we click on this right here, and it runs our query, and it takes a second because it has to load in and make that connection to the site. And what I should have realized is that I said where last name equals blank. Obviously, you watching this knew that I should have had the opposite, where the last name does not equal blank. Let's go ahead and run this one more time and go ahead and run the query. And what we should see when the query comes back is that we have Bill and Steve inside here. Now, taking this one step further, instead of just returning back the customer and getting this strongly typed access, let's go ahead and say select new, and now we'll go ahead and create an anonymous type. And so we'll say name equals, and so now we'll say C dot first name and C dot last name and IntelliSense is messing me up, new, and name equals C dot first name, and then let's go ahead and put a space in, so I'm just kind of making up whatever I want to on the fly as far as what this name property of my anonymous type is going to look like, C dot last name. And now we'll come down here and we'll say C dot name, and now we'll go ahead and run this one more time, and we run this and we should get our query back. And you can see that by using the lin syntax, creating a link statement and putting where and order by and creating an anonymous type, I can get exactly what I want inside there. So once again, what were the steps? It started with having a site collection that I use in development, and then using the SP meta utility to point to that to create the strongly typed entity classes. Once I've created the entity classes, I add that source file and a reference to Microsoft.SharePoint.link into my project, And then I create an instance of the entity class, initializing it with the proper site collection, and then I'm off and running by writing link statements that basically are able to see all the different lists that live inside that site collection, and then I have strongly typed access as I start writing the link statements.